Welcome to the Ricky Mathews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day as we continue to celebrate all the amazing people across the state of Mississippi who are working really hard in the trenches to make this a better place to live, work, and play. You know, I talk a lot about media on this show. The reason I do that, obviously, is I spent an entire career in media as the publisher and president of the Sun-Herald, and then in 2009, moving over to Advanced Condé Nast and working as a publisher in Miami, and then, Miami. Listen to me. Miami was part of the chain that the Sun-Herald was part of, but over to Mobile as the publisher and president of that company, and having responsibilities for other media companies across Alabama, and then moving over to New Orleans as the president and publisher of the Times-Picayune and president of NOLA Media Group. And then eventually as a regional president for Advanced Condé Nast. So I've seen a lot during my career. I've seen the digital tsunami take over. I've seen chain companies begin to take over the world. As you'll see, there are many media companies these days that are controlled by venture capital firms. And what you're seeing is the power, whether it be TV or radio or newspapers, you're seeing the power start to get centralized into one place. And I talk a lot about that. I think one of the benefits of being part of SuperTalk Mississippi Media is it's a company owned by a Mississippian for Mississippians. And Steve Davenport had this incredible vision, 12 radio stations that are part of SuperTalk Mississippi radio network, and then another 25 radio stations total that are various genres of music. You know some of them here in coastal Mississippi, the Monkey, WCPR, and many others like them across the state of Mississippi. They also have a news network and a central news team that only focuses on Mississippi. You don't have somebody from Indiana making a decision about what happens in Mississippi or what we get to see in Mississippi. That news team is delivering news to almost 50 radio stations across the state of Mississippi through the SuperTalk radio network. So it's the 25 stations that are part of SuperTalk, and then another nearly 25 stations that are part of this network. So a total of 50. Of course, I've said many times, and we talk about this on Fridays, that you can go to SuperTalk Mississippi News and read our news. The best way to get there is to download the SuperTalk Mississippi app or go to the SuperTalk.fm and see the news yourself. But I think what Steve has created at a time when radio stations are being centralized into a central location, Steve has done literally just the opposite. He's doubled down on local. If you go across the radio stations and TV stations that are owned by various people across the state of Mississippi, you'll see they cut across a bunch of different approaches to the corporate structure. In coastal Mississippi, for example, you have WXXV. WXXV is owned by somebody that I met along the way and had a really good relationship with. But this company is a company that, while they may own a bunch of TV stations, they still are very privately owned, and they like to be focused in that way. WLOX is part of Gray Media. It's a really large company, one of the top three in America in terms of number of TV stations that are owned by them. But you see a bunch of different possibilities. In fact, as we have this next conversation, I'll eventually give you an example of George Soros and what he's doing. And it's alarming. It's alarming. All of this should alarm you, the centralizing of news, the centralizing of decisions. And when someone like George Soros begins to get heavily involved in media through organizations like Media Matters and by buying Odyssey or a big chunk of Odyssey Radio, it's very concerning. But so it's going to be an interesting conversation. And you'd be surprised to learn that my guest today is none other than Dave Elliott. He's a veteran here on the coast. You know him well. He's part of everyone's household. He's going to be starting actually next week on the air as an anchor for WXXV. And we'll, again, we're going to cover the waterfront, but I'm really proud of Dave for moving over to WXXV. I think you're making a good move, and I think you're going to see a lot of viewers follow you there. So without any further ado, let me welcome back to the show Dave Elliott. How you doing, Dave?
Hey, Ricky, it's always a pleasure to be with you. I appreciate it, and I enjoyed your monologue.
Is that, yeah. Well, look, here it's good. We're going to get into all that before it's all over with. Just what our perceptions are, what's happening. in the world as media gets more centralized. I have posted a lot about it because I've seen it from inside. I understand what it looks like. But let's, before we do that, let me just ask you right off the bat, how do you feel about joining the WXXV team?
Well, this is easier said than done, Ricky, but I'm trying to delete the last 40 years and pretending like I'm fresh out of college and this is my first job. And I'm very excited about XXV because I believe the sands are shifting here on this coast in terms of viewership, and some of these legacy stations like WLOX are kind of teetering right now, and it's opening up an opportunity for some of these stations like WXXV, who have historically been the number 2 station in the market, to kind of make a move, to start to get aggressive, to pick up the pieces of these corporate stations that I think are imploding.
Yeah. Well, you got, again, it's an interesting reality of what's happening. Again, this is newspaper, this is digital media, this is TV stations, radio stations. A lot of decisions are going to be made centrally from this time forward. But look, you and I had the opportunity to work for companies that were incredibly locally focused and made decisions locally. When I was working for Knight Ridder as the publisher of the Sun Herald, Knight Ridder literally made no decisions about editorial voice, about news decisions that we were making. They were completely, when I say completely, buddy, I mean 100% hands off. Okay. They gave us goals from a business perspective. We were able to share best practices on the news teams across the country. But at the end of the day, when it came to making decisions about how we reflect our community, we had 100% control. As time went on, Knight Ridder gets bought by McClatchy. McClatchy starts to have the digital tsunami come over it. It ultimately files for bankruptcy. Venture capital firms get involved, and tremendous centralization starts to occur, both in terms of print and the digital side. So decisions are being made about what gets posted on sunherald.com and what gets into the Sun Herald, in terms of the print edition, what there is left of it. A lot of those decisions are being made by people who don't live here. They're being made centrally. Now, a lot of other companies have made that decision. A lot of radio companies have made that decision. A lot of TV stations have made that decision. But I've seen both worlds. I had the opportunity to work for the Newhouse family and Advanced Local and Advanced Condé Nast, and 100% of the decisions for how we reflect the local community were made and valued locally. But in this cookie cutter world that we're in, is all these media companies are trying to find their economies of scale and trying to cut resources and centralize a lot of the decisions, both on the business side and on the news side. It's a changing world, and you've seen it from both perspectives, haven't you?
Well, I came to the coast in 1985. It was a locally owned and operated television station by Love Broadcasting. I was good friends with Jimmy Love. And then in different iterations over the next 40 years, a smaller corporation bought it, then a larger fish bought that one, and then another one acquired it, and then ultimately it ended up with Gray, and they own more than 100 television stations. And as you've been talking about, these corporations are into uniformity. They want all of their stations, basically, regardless of city, state, or region, to kind of have that same look, to kind of have that same philosophy. And I think what gets lost in all of that is the local social and political views, the history, the culture. And even though the people inside the newsrooms are doing their best to try to reflect that, there still are these corporate pressures. And it's just natural. That's the way corporate America kind of looks at their assets. And I have seen it, and I've seen it get worse and worse. You talked about Morris owning WXXV, 15 television stations, privately held. They're not publicly traded like all of these huge corporations. So there is room for a lot of local input and a lot of people making decisions on the ground on the coast, not in Atlanta, not in Dallas, not in Chicago, not in wherever these corporations happen to be headquartered.
Yeah, if I were to talk to Charles Morris Sr. today and chat with him about how many times he's been approached by people like Sinclair Broadcasting Group or Nexstar Media Group or even Great Television. Those are the top three ownership groups. First one with 150 stations, next one over 150 as well, and then Gray with last count 131 stations. I bet he would tell you he's been approached a bunch of times, but he's held out. He's held out. I bet Steve Davenport, even from SuperTalk Mississippi Media, has been approached in the past. And I can't see him doing anything other than holding out because he's so committed to Mississippi, which I think is a great competitive advantage. Hey, when we come back, we're going to continue this part of the conversation with Dave Elliott. And we're also going to look back in some of the big news stories that he's been involved with over the course of his 40-year career. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend Dave Elliott. You know him well. He's a face that most Mississippians know, certainly coastal Mississippians, and have been someone that we've relied on for news and information for a number of years. Hey, when we went to break, though, we were talking about these about how really TV, radio, and newspapers are really centralizing their decision making, both on the business side and on the news side. Again, the top three: Sinclair Broadcast Group, Nexstar Media Group, and Gray Television. Gray Television is who owns the WLOX. And so it's a really large company. One of the things, if you go look them up, I would really encourage you to go look up Gray Media if you have an interest in doing so. And one of the things that you'll notice is they have a lot of executives, which I'm really, really kind of surprised by. It's a very top-heavy, large organization. And in a time when media companies are under a lot of pressure, I'm really surprised to see that much sort of corporate governance at a company like that, which goes to make the point that a lot of decisions are being made corporately there. But when you look at the universe of TV stations, about 30 owners, this could change from any day. Because this is an ever-moving target. 30 owners own the nation's 1,000 plus full-powered television stations. Just 30 owners. Think about that for a second. And then when you think about media, U.S. media in general, 6 companies account for 90% of U.S. media. It's just 6 companies: AT&T, CBS, Comcast, Disney, News Corp, and Viacom. Ricky,
if I can just jump in right there. Yeah. I have always had a philosophical problem with that because I've never liked the idea of so few people controlling that much information. I just find that undemocratic, if nothing else, to have really the power. That much power in the hands of so few people. And you talk about these administrative heavy corporations, and you think of all of the money that is spent on travel, on salaries, and you think about, well, wait a second. If we poured that same amount of revenue into resources and people at these local television, radio, digital companies, we would be doing the electorate and the viewers and the listeners so much more for them instead of feeding these content factories, I call them, because that's what they're doing. They're just cranking out content and they're sharing. I mean, Gray has WLOX, they have WLBT, they have WDAM, they have WTOK. So they're basically controlling so much media from Meridian to Jackson to Hattiesburg to the coast. Is that a good thing?
And even New Orleans.
Yeah, VUE over in New Orleans. And I believe, I can't remember which one, ALA, whoever it is, in Mobile. So if you just look at that stranglehold right there, I mean, where is the the freedom for movement in the marketplace of ideas.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what's interesting, I think a way to relate this is to think about when cable first came about, CNN was created. Ted Turner was really a genius in thinking through this whole notion of a 24-hour news operation. But what happened as they continued to evolve, and then Fox came along, and then we now know the rest of the story, MSNBC and others. As these companies evolved, what happened was they had a lot of time to fill, so they had a lot of talking heads. The talking heads tended to be controlled by a group of editors, and they had a particular philosophy about their political philosophy. We'd always, I tell you, the days of Walter Cronkite are gone. I'm gonna relay an interesting story to you. You'll find interesting. It's actually also pretty sad. After Hurricane Katrina, an NBC reporter came to the Sun Herald, a really notable, widely known anchor, came to the Sun Herald. And the purpose of his visit here, the New York editors from New York sent him to coastal Mississippi after Hurricane Katrina to do a story about how we were bulldozing African-American and Vietnamese homes in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And I said, what in the world? Stan, Tyne, and I both tried to convince him that you need to go with us into the market and let us show you there's the only bulldozing that's going on is of debris. I mean, we're talking this place has been wiped off the face of the earth. So your narrative, whatever that narrative is completely wrong. And so he said, look,
talk about, Ricky, you talk about this narrative. That's exactly what it is. They get in their mind, this is the story we're going to tell. And even when they get here and find out that isn't the real story, they still made a commitment to tell that story. ABC's Mark Potter was at WLOX during Hurricane Katrina. He wrote all of these beautiful stories, and he would have to call them into New York. In New York, he got so mad. I talked to him about it. New York would change the copy. New York would change the narrative, as you talk about, the direction of the story as they're sitting in there and they have no idea what's going on here on the Mississippi coast. And I saw how frustrated he got by that. He told me that happens all the time, no matter where he goes, no matter what story he covers.
Yeah, let me tell you the rest of the story. So it mirrors what the story you just told. So I think we effectively convinced him after he spent time out on the point of Biloxi and really seeing for himself what the situation was. He said, I get it now, and I'm going to talk to them. He interviewed me in the newsroom of the Sun Herald. And then just before he left, he came into my office and he said, I owe you an apology. I said, why? He said, I have conveyed to New York what I've learned since I've been here, but they wanted to stick with the same narrative. And so he goes back to New York, the story runs, and it was pathetically biased. And it was wrong. It was literally wrong. And not long after that, I got a handwritten note from him, telling how much he appreciated being here and that it touched him and so on. I literally, Dave, I framed it. I framed it and put it in my office because I wanted it to be a reminder of when you can't be controlled. News cannot be controlled from some central location, because the people in those locations can tend to be biased. And, so that's the reality. I mean, you can respond to that.
Well, actually, I'm going to make an analogy into the world of politics. I'm totally opposed to centralized government. I think, I'm a big states' rights guy, a big 10th Amendment guy. And I think we're going to see more of that happening now over the next 4 years. Decisions about what happens in schools as far as curriculum and everything else, or with transportation in Mississippi, shouldn't be decided by unelected bureaucrats sitting up in Washington, D.C. I think there's an interesting kind of correlation and analogy there. Centralized government, centralized media management. We all know that both politics and media works best when it's kind of managed as close to the people as possible. And I'm hopeful that over the next few years, I've given up kind of on media. I don't think there's any way of stopping this tsunami as you talk about. But I think with government, there's a chance to maybe get a little bit of control away from the unelected bureaucrats in Washington who are making decisions that affect Mississippi, Idaho, Montana, Alabama. I say send the money back to the states and let the states make the decisions.
Yeah, I think we're going to, I think we're going to see massive efforts toward decentralization. We're going to see massive. We already see that. We already see that taking hold before our very eyes. A discussion about the bureaucracy in America and how do we best deal with that. But look, this notion about bias is, I think, bring it all the way up to the current situation. I don't think that media entities could have gotten it more wrong or could have fought what ultimately was the majority of Americans wanting to see change. It's quite amazing that in spite of all their efforts, that we're still where we are. It really is. And by the way, I haven't given up on media. And the reason I haven't given up on media is because you have Steve Davenports of the world that are holding tight, to the situation for Mississippi. And you've got the Morris family holding tight on sort of maintaining the situation as best they can so that there can be local decisions and so on. But more importantly than anything, what Elon Musk has done by the purchasing of X is transformative in ways we don't even fully appreciate. So when we come back on the other side, we'll chat a little bit about that. But then I want to shift the gears and look back on your career, some of the big stories that you've covered, and then we'll talk a little bit about how excited you are to be joining WXXV. So when we come back on the other side, we'll continue.
I want to get into a lot of free speech issues here, and you brought up Elon Musk. If we can do that,
I'm looking forward to that for sure. When we get back on the other side, we're actually going to go there with Dave Elliott, and I think you'll enjoy that part of the conversation. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I have Dave Elliott, longtime anchor and journalist here in coastal Mississippi. He'll be starting next week at WXXV, and we're kind of talking about the state of media. And I mentioned before we went to break that Elon Musk, what he has done in buying X, or at the time Twitter, now X, has been transformative. But see, I've always, I came from digital media, so I already was quite aware of how the algorithms work. And when you've got liberal folks who work in Silicon Valley who have political bias, they can build into the algorithms their political bias. So Facebook and at the time Twitter and other companies, Google, for example, all have built into their algorithms political bias. So I said the first thing that we're going to learn when Elon Musk buys Twitter is we're going to get to actually see underneath the covers and see what they were doing to build this machine that allowed them to push a specific political agenda. My belief is that we should have free speech, that people should be able to say what they think. And whether it's wrong or not, what I love about what's happening on X today is that the community usually helps decide what is wrong or not. And that doesn't mean I can't say it, but it means if I'm wrong, they're going to police me and make sure that another point of view is expressed. But what Elon has done by buying Twitter and then helping us really appreciate this, it is going to transform other media. And we now see what is possible. And free speech literally is at the core of a democracy. We don't have a democracy if we don't have free speech. What do you think about that, Dave?
Well, I mean, I think Elon Musk has been one of the biggest stories in the last couple of years, and we even saw it in this presidential campaign. I mean, when Trump can corral Elon Musk, RFK Jr., and Tulsi Gabbard, and Vice President Harris was left with Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and George Clooney, I mean, that's not even a match. And I think Elon Musk, now whether or not he actually does this Department of Government Oversight and Waste, that they're now saying he's going to team up with Vivek Ramaswamy to do that and try to trim $2 trillion in fat out of the budget. I do believe that Elon Musk, I mean, look at SpaceX, look at Starlink, look at Tesla. I mean, this is one of the world's most interesting men. He builds stuff, he makes stuff, he does incredible things. Everybody who's sitting in Washington, what do? They spend other people's money. They spend my money. They don't create anything. Hell, lately, in the last 20 years, they don't even create legislation except deficit building, debt building legislation. So I hope everybody learns a lesson about censorship, cancel culture, free speech, and everything else. I think we were at a real fork in the road here in 2024, and I'm hoping this is a victory for free speech and a defeat for any kind of cancel culture and censorship.
Yeah, I mean, the cancel culture is a really big thing, and it's
I
really
was a victim of it.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, you're speaking your mind, sharing your point of view on your own time. So,
Well, yeah, well, no, Ricky, there's always this assumption in our business that the company, the station, owns your name, image, likeness. Well, yeah, when I'm on television, when I'm on the clock, but when I leave, I'm a citizen, I'm a husband, I'm a father, I have opinions, I care about the community. I know there's this vast supermajority silent in South Mississippi. And on the other side, and I was victimized by it, I know who the group is. It's primarily a group out of the Jackson Media Club, what I call the Jackson Media Cartel, who have been out to get me for a long time. They're loud, they're angry, they're unhappy, they got to gray, and that's what kind of led to all of this. And what I'm seeing in the wake of all of this is the vast, silent, super majority speaking out now. And they're out there.
yeah. Well, look, man, think about Media Matters. And what Media Matters has done on the national scale to create a cancel culture. And I don't think that most people realize that George Soros is the major financier of Media Matters, and the list goes on and on. You think about George Soros getting control, at least buying a large stake. I think it's in the 40% range of Odyssey Radio. And just so you know, if you look at the list, you have iHeart is number one, Odyssey is number two. Then it's Cumulus, Hubbard, Beasley, and of course Sirius XM after that. But you got, man, Odyssey owns 220 stations across 47 media markets in America. To think that George Soros is going to apply in any way a political agenda to those organizations, it's scary. You know, where is the pressure points coming from? How much voice does particular venture capital funds have, and what the voice is going to be at any station anywhere? I am extremely skeptical about when news decisions are made at a corporate level. Very skeptical about that. And I think what we've learned through what Elon Musk has done, when we put X in the hands of citizens, and we have citizen journalists who video what they see themselves and they share what they're seeing. I had a really interesting experience when I was doing some training for the Sun Herald. I lived up in St. Paul, Minnesota for about a month, and I spent time with reporters. Just say it again.
That's my home state. I'm a Minneapolis kid.
What a beautiful place, I might add. I loved it there. And I drove into Wisconsin to get a feel for that. But anyway, I rode all day one day with a reporter. A young man had been killed in a drive-by shooting. And she said, I don't want his 15 minutes of fame to be that he was killed in a drive-by shooting. So we spent the whole day out talking to people who knew this kid, and she wrote this incredible, touching story about him. But what she said was, there are not two sides to every story. There are as many sides to a story as there are people involved in the story. So what makes X so magic to me is that we get to see it from everybody's perspective. People are going to see each situation slightly different, whether it's a car wreck or a political point of view. And it's good to have access to all of that so that we can decide. We as as players in our democracy can decide what do we want to believe and where do we want to vote and how do we want to vote. It's so
Well,
magical and it's so important.
I want to throw one other thing in there, Ricky, and I don't know if you're a fan of TikTok, but I've become very active. I didn't do Twitter for a long time. I would go out and cover a story. There'd be a police car out in front of a house, and I'd take a photograph and I'd write Gulfport police investigating shooting. And then when Elon Musk turned Twitter into X, I started getting active on it again and started getting a little political. But I also, believe it or not, and I've grown a bit of an audience on TikTok. You probably don't like TikTok. A lot of people don't. A lot of people think it's the Chinese Communist Party, data mining our lives. I'm not too worried about that. Google and Apple are just as bad as China when it comes to that. So I'm going to make a push. I'm done with Meta. Facebook, is I don't even find interesting anymore. But I find X, and believe it or not, I don't know what your feelings are on TikTok. I find TikTok during, let's say, what was happening between the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, and Hamas in Gaza. You're seeing an ABC reporter standing on a hill 15 miles away from the fighting. You go to TikTok, you're seeing real video from real people on the streets of Gaza. It was incredible. It was eye-opening to me. And I think that is going to be maybe the future of how we start getting a lot of our information after you sift through the misinformation. But I think people are smart enough. I give Americans more credit than the politicians and the media giants do. I think people can sift through and find the truth.
Yeah, I've had many shows about X in particular that what Elon Musk plans to do is to make it a super app, and there are great examples of that. But where you can do, buying of things on this platform, where you can have TikTok-like existence as well. I think that he's going to give TikTok a run for its money. I have that concern that you mentioned, that this is a Chinese organization, and the data, they say it's being protected. I worry about that. I really do. And that's for another conversation.
You have an Apple iPhone. You have an Apple iPhone, don't you? You use Google, don't you? They're just as bad.
I'm with you. I'm with you. But at least these are American companies that are controlling those devices.
They're multinational corporations.
They are, for
They're
sure.
Bad with China. They're bad with China.
So is X, for that matter. But you got this. What they've made TikTok sticky for young people. They have done all kinds of. They've made it sticky for small businesses. They have masterfully grown that. And what will they do with it? Is it they see it as a business or some approach to be able to see what's happening on a household level for Americans? I don't know for sure, But in the meantime, it is absolutely a viable piece of the media, and it tells us for sure what's happening on every address there is. If I can go out there and do a TikTok video right here in my front yard, and everybody will see it, or at least a lot of people will. Hey, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation. We'll finish it. We'll pick it up on the other side with Dave Elliott after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Mathews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have Dave Elliott with me today, and we're just chatting about the state of media today. It's a very interesting conversation, and I think if you've listened to the whole show, you have a sense that we're in kind of a tsunami of changes for the media industry, and a lot of them are not good. And bias, as we've all come to understand from this past election, is alive and well in most major institutions, and it's a problem. So, Dave, you're joining WXXV. I'm actually kind of curious. Was that in the works? Don Moore, who had a key role at WLOX, now the general manager at WXXV. What's the story behind that?
Well, Don and I go way back. We worked together. As you mentioned, he was at WLOX. I've always had the greatest respect for Don. And he and I have been talking dating back to about July. We were going to do this deal. It was going to happen in January. I was going to wrap things up quietly at the end of the year and just kind of vanish and then suddenly appear on XXV. I had this great plan. And maybe WLOX got wind of that. As a matter of fact, I'm sure they did. And maybe that is part of what happened at the end with me at WLOX. So Don and I, what we did is we took a contract we were looking at to start in January, and because of the way things went down, we just had to move the timetable up, obviously. And now, November 25th, I'll be doing the 5 and 6 o'clock news. It's a part-time job. Ricky, I'm like you. I can't retire. I got too much energy. I got too many opinions. I'm an earner. I want to earn. I want to work. So I wanted to go to a beautiful part-time job, which is what this is going to be with WXXV. And I think they are on the precipice of making a move in this market. I never used to watch them. I actually started watching them the last couple of weeks when all of this was coming together. And I think they actually have a fresh product at WXXV. I should say we, not they. And I'm excited to see what happens, what comes out of all of this.
So I'm excited. Look, Kate McGandy, who I worked with at the Sun Herald for so many years, she's had many roles in sports, city editor, just an absolute gem of a person. She's working in the bowels of that news operation, I think, contributing in a wonderful way. But when you got people like that and you're attracting people like you can't help but wonder about the future of WXXV certainly being stronger than it is today. It is a shame, though, at the end of the day, that you can't just say what you think. Some people can handle that, and some people can't. That's the way it goes these days.
Ricky, I was so careful on my Facebook page. I was warned. I was told to show restraint. I'm not going to lie and deny that, and I kind of ignored that. But I took every possible measure on X. I scrubbed every bit of branding and imagery from WLOX. I wasn't Dave Elliott. I was the real D. Elliott. I was sitting in my, you and I know this, sunglasses and a baseball cap at my house. I was trying to reach a national audience. When I look at my followers on X and on TikTok, by the way, I have people who don't know who I am, where I work, what I do for a living. That was the audience I was going after. And WLOX didn't get that.
Yeah. Well, but see, again, I know how this works. This was kind of thrown to Atlanta for the folks in Gray to weigh in, and they made their cookie cutter decision. And that's the way this works. I think if this would not have been my sense is, and I don't know anything. I don't know. I have no knowledge about any of this, but I've been involved in corporate governance before. If this was a decision that was made locally, it probably wouldn't have been made the way that they made it. They tend to be a lot more rigid when they've got a certain point of view. And the sad part about it, you were sharing a conservative point of view. That's what's unfortunate about it, which fits this market. I know there are Democrats and Republicans alike that live here, but Mississippi is very red, and the reality is you were sharing a point of view that a lot of Mississippians assigned to, and it wasn't even a radical point of view at that. Just a conservative.
Well, I'm an independent, Ricky. I'm a conservative independent. I went to, and I don't know how much time you have left. A week or so ago, I went to the Republican Club or whatever it is on the Gulf Coast, and they were very, very kind. They applauded for me when I came in and everything. And the very first thing I said is, that most of you old timers here know, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm a conservative independent. I had people who for years have told me I thought you were a raging liberal all these years, Dave. I mean,
hey, Dave,
I used to get complaints from the Trump supporters in 2016.
Well, look, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat either. The way I describe my regular listeners know this, I'm center right. That's where my beliefs are. And there are some of my closest Democrat friends that believe 99% of what I believe. There's just a small nuance. And most of America's right there in the middle. But we're out of time, Dave. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you. I look forward to joining me again.
All righty. And November 25th, 5 and 6 o'clock news with the Dave Elliott on WXXV News 25.
That's an exciting change. Look forward to seeing it. Listen, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.